welcome again to everyone. I'm here with Mary Gabriel, who's our program manager, and we're about to kick off our virtual Great Decisions discussion series. We've already had our first, which took a look at U.S.-China relations, and we held that in person at Harrisburg Area Community College on its campus here. And it was a fabulous time in which we brought together some people who had actually participated in our recent trip to China. And we are developing a great collaboration with them, and actually are looking forward to planning even more cultural and educational exchanges between the World Affairs Council of Harrisburg and our collaborators, our correspond, our those organizations and schools in China that want to partner and with us. So. But now we're moving on to a different topic, one that I think is on everybody's mind. And that topic is Trump's tariffs and just what does that mean for the global economy. And I won't be moderating this one. We're going to turn it over to Russell Goodman, who will be the moderator of this because of his expertise in international logistics and in international business. And of course, everybody knows, because we've had him so many times, Dr. Sanjay Paul from Elizabethtown College, who is our resident economic expert, international economic expert. So we're now Mary is working the behind the scenes to get the video from the Foreign Policy Association up. After that, we will watch that video. When you come back, Russell will take over. He will introduce Dr. Sanjay Paul, who will hold forth for a little while, and then they will engage in conversation and questions from us, because I'm sure we'll all have questions. So, Mary, you can start the Foreign Policy Association video.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Great Decisions Masterclass. Our foreign policy challenge, or great decision today, is tariffs as an instrument of economic and foreign policy. Donald Trump made tariffs a central theme of his 2024 campaign, calling the word the most beautiful in the English language. There's a consistency here. Dating back to the 1980s, Mr. Trump penned op-eds in major newspapers denouncing American trade policy abroad, especially as it relates to Asia.
We are going to be imposing a 25% increase. We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America, which will even further secure the steel industry in the United States. Nobody's going to get around that.
So how exactly do tariffs work? We begin with two countries in a trade relationship. Country A produces a commodity that it seeks to export. It may be very sophisticated, like a computer or automobile. It also could be a natural resource, unfinished product, or a foodstuff. When it arrives at American ports of entry, whether it's Los Angeles, Houston, Miami, or New Jersey, it is halted until a tariff is paid. That tariff, which can vary from one product to another, from one country to another, is deposited in the U.S. Treasury, at which point the product is allowed to continue to arrive on American shelves. Our timeline for tariffs dating back to 1900 shows a great deal of variation. In 1900, tariffs were very high, averaging around 25%. There was a precipitous decline in our tariffs, followed by a rise, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, and then followed by another decline, one that has continued through the 21st century. In 2024, when Mr. Trump was elected, our average tariff was around 3%. The Roaring Twenties are associated with a decline in tariffs in the 1920s, the Great Depression associated with rising tariffs, and then following World War II, the United States began a concerted effort in reducing tariffs across the board, producing a period of historic prosperity not only for the United States, but for countries around the world. 2025, we see a dramatic increase in tariffs. The questions are why? Why now, and towards what end? I begin with a review of the purposes of tariffs as explained by advocates of the policy. Tariffs give us a way of creating fairness in trade with other countries. We and competitors pay many of the same categories of prices in producing an object. There are wages for workers, taxes applied, things like Social Security and Medicare, and finally there are environmental regulations that increase the cost of producing an object. Our competitors pay many of the same categories, but their wages are much, much lower. Even if their tax rate, Social Security, and environmental regulations are identical, you can see those countries enjoy a trade advantage over the United States. They can produce and sell products in our country for less than we can produce and sell products in their country. But many don't have environmental regulations, or Social Security for that matter, and their taxes are often much lower on businesses. This creates a significant trade disadvantage for the United States. We're not going to be able to sell to them as easily and profitably as they sell to us. Tariffs can level that playing field. Trade deficits, something we've been concerned about for about 45 years now. We had a trade deficit in 1982, but look how it exploded in the decades that followed. We're simply buying more from the world than the world is buying from us, creating a trade imbalance and a deficit. Tariffs can help us to spur domestic production. If foreigners aren't as competitive, we can produce commodities here at home and sell them to the American public and abroad. It encourages a Buy American campaign, producing sales tax revenue, more investment in the United States, and of course with it, more jobs for American citizens. It's a virtuous cycle. We can use tariffs to shape the behavior of other countries, to signal that if they go down this path, it will be at a higher cost, and we can punish target countries who we believe are behaving improperly. Think about, for example, the war between Russia and Ukraine. It began in 2022. The U.S. and the European Union applied very stiff sanctions against Russia, including tariffs. Russia could rely upon China and India for the import of their goods and for the export of Russian energy, so we sanctioned them as well. In 2025, Mr. Trump announced a 50% tariff on China and India because it continued to import Russian oil. So we're using tariffs to shape the behavior of China and India and using them to punish Russia for its illegal invasion of Ukraine. So for all of these reasons, one has to ask the question, why in the world did we ever abandon tariffs? Why didn't we keep them artificially high from 1900 to the present? To answer that question, we look to U.S. foreign policy direction after World War II. We learn lessons between the two world wars, most notably that when America steps back from the world, it becomes less stable, and when countries do not trade with each other, they are more likely to go to war with each other. There was a Great Depression that is often blamed on the tariffs of the 1930s, and World War II is oftentimes attributed to the depression that preceded it.
In the U.S., the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, signed in 1930, was a package of tariffs put on thousands of imported products. It's now blamed for deepening the Great Depression.
It actually happened in the middle of the Great Depression. It did not cause the Great Depression. It was a response to the Great Depression. And the idea behind it was because we had huge unemployment, we were in the middle of the Great Depression, we'd have the Wall Street crash, that this would be a way to try and keep our money domestically.
Trade barriers were raised precipitously and basically blocked imports coming to the United States. It contributed to a decline in economic output and a precipitous drop in employment and the Great Depression.
They were originally trying to protect the farmers, and then other industries said, well, what about me, what about me, what about me?
When the war ended in 1945, our allies were in ruins. The U.S. economy was booming. It gave us the latitude to craft global economic policy.
Back in those days, we were by far the biggest steel makers in the world, and by far the biggest airplane producers, car producers, whatever you wanted to look at. We had half of the world's GDP. I think we thought we were taking and did take a constructive approach by opening our markets to others, but we inspected their markets to be open to us.
Enter John Maynard Keynes, the most influential economist of the 20th century. He argued that mercantilism, the policy we in the world had pursued before the onset of World War II, was both destructive and counterproductive. He devised a plan called the Liberal International Economic Order that would be the blueprint for U.S. and global economics moving forward. Do keep in mind that while liberal means someone in politics who advocates for heavier government hand and usually higher taxes, in economic terms, a liberal is a capitalist. Adam Smith is the father of liberal economics or capitalism. And it is free trade that John Maynard Keynes suggested for the United States as the leader of the global system. This is an interesting economic debate, mercantilist versus capitalist. The mercantilists are called economic nationalists, while capitalists are internationalists who embrace interdependence with other countries. The mercantilist believes strongly in self-reliance, while the capitalist contends that comparative advantage will make everyone rich. Produce what you're most economically efficient at producing and export as much as possible to the world. You then use that revenue, those profits, to import the things you are not creating yourself. To mercantilist, economics and trade, zero-sum games. If the other side wins, by definition, we've lost. But to capitalists, we're playing a mutually beneficial game. Everyone can win if they trade freely with one another. As Ronald Reagan famously quipped, a rising tide lifts all ships. There is a geostrategic dimension to this economic debate. Both mercantilists and capitalists seek the same result: prosperity here at home and peace abroad. The path that they take are drastically different. For mercantilists, you can be prosperous, safe, and secure if you isolate yourself from the rest of the world. For capitalists, it's the exact opposite. Engage the world, trade with them, become prosperous, and through all of that trading, the likelihood of war goes down dramatically. It's not as expensive to go to war with a country you're not trading and investing in or importing commodities from, but it's very expensive to go to war with a country you're deeply dependent upon economically. It's a pendulum that swings between mercantilism or closed trade and capitalism or open trade. In 1930, the pendulum was over here. When the Second World War ended, Smoot-Hawley was blamed for that conflict. We shifted all the way over to free trade. A liberal economic order. Our status in the world since World War II has evolved if we're simply measuring growth. There's no question we have benefited from this economic model. Capitalism and free trade have made us an extraordinarily wealthy country in the aggregate and on a per capita basis. In terms of relative wealth, the U.S. compared to everyone else, there's an obvious decline. We were largely untouched by World War II economically. It actually spurred our economy. Most of the industrialized world was destroyed by it. So they were very low on the food chain and we were very, very high. We haven't switched places, but the rest of the world has caught up to us. In other words, we're a victim of our own success. We wanted Japan, Korea, Europe, and others to economically prosper and become trading partners with the United States. That's a smashing success. Inside the U.S. economy, it has come at a cost. Our economic system has evolved over time, from basic foodstuffs to light manufacturing, heavy industry, finance, and now fiber optics, artificial intelligence, and robots. In other words, blue-collar jobs have been in steady decline for the last 80 years. At the same time, income inequality has exploded since the 1980s. Here we're a victim of our own policies. My generation, the baby boomers, in positions of power since probably the 1990s, have been drafting laws and regulations, tax codes that benefit us and don't exactly benefit the average American. In fact, recently the Wall Street Journal asked Americans, do you believe in the American dream? Is it still viable to work hard and have a better life than your parents? 70% of Americans said no. The American dream is no more. Young people cannot afford homes. They don't have faith in the evolving economy. They do not believe they'll be better off than their parents. And this is not just going to economically depress people. It's also going to politically depress them. Because if they've concluded it really doesn't matter who I vote for, they're elites and they're just going to protect themselves and their fellow elites, so why bother to participate? Is one of the reasons that the United States since 2016 has seen a declining democracy rating. A longing for the good old days is suddenly very much in, and Donald Trump has ridden that wave. Here he is, a 1%er meeting the average guy saying, I'm on your side. I'm going to bring you and your fellow workers back to the mainstream of America. And it has worked politically. Over the course of the last 15 years, in only a decade's time here, 45% of blue-collar workers voting Republican, up to 57% in 2020, and in 2024, hovering around 56%. So Mr. Trump's rhetoric and his policies, and the Republicans in general before Donald Trump, they have been successful in attracting blue-collar workers. So the pendulum goes from 2016, where we are suddenly going to say no to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where Mr. Trump is denouncing NAFTA and openly talking about using tariffs to bring jobs back home. That pushed the needle over to the closed trade side towards mercantilism. And today we're seeing the highest tariffs since the 1930s. There are problems with tariffs. First of all, they are inflationary. There's no way around this. When a commodity arrives, it's going to be taxed with a tariff. Now, the manufacturer may absorb the tariffs initially. The retailers in the U.S. may absorb them initially, but at some point, they're going to pass those increased prices, those costs, on to consumers. That means inflation. They will also lead to retaliation. The rest of the world isn't just going to sit back and take it, suddenly paying 15, 25, or 75% tariffs on their exports to the United States. They're going to apply tariffs to our imports into their country. Evasive maneuvers will be found by countries and by corporations. There are ways to avoid the tariffs. There's a manufacturing firm, American-owned by the way, in China, that produces sneakers. Mr. Trump applied a 25% tariff to sneakers. So what does this company do? Does it pull up stakes and relocate to the United States? No, it slightly modifies the design, changes one element in the product so that those sneakers now qualify as slippers. Slippers faces a 5% tariff. So by that one simple move, they're reducing their tariffs from 25% to 5%. Add to that the reality of business. These multinational corporations, Ford, for example, Apple, among so many others, owned by Americans who are invested heavily in China by building industries, they can't just pull up stakes and move to the U.S. They can't spend the billions of dollars that would cost to relocate everyone and everything here. If they do move, they're going to Vietnam or Cambodia, maybe the Philippines. But more than likely, they're just trapped in China. They'll have to figure out a way around the tariffs. It means a lower level of trade in general and very serious supply chain problems. Because if China cannot import critical goods into the U.S. at a profit, it will just send them somewhere else, to Canada, to Mexico, to Europe, or any other consumer market, and suddenly we don't have the products we need on a daily basis. Farmers, more than anyone right now, caught in the gears of this trade war. The tariffs have created a real headache for farmers and present an existential threat to their survival. Farmers worry about inflation, interest rates, and retaliation. All three of them are synonymous with tariffs. When you add to that the fact that soy and corn prices have already collapsed in 2025 at the time of this filming to roughly 50% of what they were before Donald Trump became president, the alarm bells are sounding across rural America. These farms are in threat of going under. And then if the tariffs weren't enough, add to that a very strict migration policy. ICE raids happening across the country, picking up dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of farm workers. Migrants make up over 50% of farm workers in the United States. You take those people off the doles, you have to replace them with Americans who demand more, higher wages, better working conditions, Social Security taxes, Medicare, Medicaid, and suddenly you're looking at more inflation, which will drive up interest rates again. So it's a cycle that does not bode well for American farmers. The problems with the approach in particular, the way Donald Trump has applied tariffs. First of all, the targets. Why are you targeting those particular countries and not others? Why do some countries get a break while others don't? Why do some commodities from Canada, from Mexico or China get to escape tariffs while others face 40 or 50% tariffs? Also, the countries in question. This is a policy that could have been very successful had it been applied narrowly and specifically to our principal economic rival, which is China. China is very vulnerable on the trade issue, and it has reason to be so. It practices unfairly. It provides domestic support that violates international agreements. It dumps products on our market. There are other countries on the sidelines, big economies like in Europe and South Asia, across Africa and Latin America. If we had focused exclusively on China and consistently said what they're doing to us, they're also doing to you. They're dumping in your markets. They're undermining your domestic production. There's a good chance we could have positioned ourselves on the side of those countries and collectively gone after China and forced it to trade more fairly. But we did not do that. Instead, Mr. Trump tariffed basically the whole world. Allies, adversaries, economies large and small. And what he's done is he's driven them towards China. Now they're victims just like China. They're working with China to avoid and respond to American tariffs, leaving us even more isolated and powerless than before. When Mr. Xi of China hosted Mr. Modi and Mr. Putin, China hosting Russia and India, it was a signal that those three will get together, form an alliance to counter American tariffs. The underlying data is highly questionable. On April 1st of 2025, Mr. Trump announced Liberation Day for America, the beginning of high tariffs, and he held up a chart to indicate which countries would suffer and suffer the most. But economists have looked at these numbers and frankly can't make sense of them. We don't know where they came from. There seems to be no consistency. We're not sure what economic calculation led to these numbers. There's been a wholesale lack of consistency. He announces tariffs, gives a specific deadline, and then rescinds the tariffs or extends the deadline. The investors on Wall Street refer to him as Taco. Trump always chickens out, something that has not gone over well in the White House for obvious reasons. Changing demands. Sometimes Mr. Trump says this is all about domestic production. At other times, no, it's about political decisions abroad. Brazil faced a 50% tariff when it decided to prosecute a former president of the country, an ally of Mr. Trump. The legality of these tariffs. I think of tariffs as a tax. When I look at the U.S. Constitution, it's abundantly clear only the Congress has the power to tax. An appeals court in August of 2025 ruled 7-4 that almost all of Mr. Trump's tariffs are illegal. They're taxes. Only the Congress can authorize them. That case is on its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. By the time you receive this lecture, that decision will have already been made. Will the Supreme Court view tariffs as a tax and therefore illegal when they come from the White House? Or will they say that there's a line that separates taxes and tariffs and therefore the president can follow through on his tariffs? And as noted in the first lecture, Mr. Trump is approaching lame duck status. By the end of this year, for you, 2026, the 2028 campaign will be underway. And so countries far and wide understand there's going to be a new president in the White House, maybe one who will rescind all the tariffs, and so they largely are hunkering down and waiting out Donald Trump. In the big picture, what is this really about? We know there are problems that we have with other countries. They could be economic, social, political, legal. They could be geostrategic. And Mr. Trump is using tariffs to address those problems. On the surface, I understand that. At times, I even support it. The U.S. should punish countries that misbehave, whether it's in their trade relations with us or in their actions towards neighboring countries. But as I think about Donald Trump, his view of the world and America's place within it, I see tariffs as something driven by a larger policy and a more central concern, which is migration. Mr. Trump wants to deport large numbers of people who are not here legally. Perfectly fine. You must be legal to be in the United States. If you're undocumented, you should not take American jobs. If we don't have Americans to fill those roles, then Congress should act to create provisions allowing people from abroad to enter the U.S., fill those roles for a period of time, and then depart when their services are no longer necessary. Mr. Trump seems to view this in a much larger context. He wants fewer foreigners in this country. And if there's one thing that correlates very clearly and closely with immigration, it is trade. When you trade with a country over time, that trade rises and falls for a variety of reasons. That very closely aligns with the number of their people living in your country and your people living in theirs. If you trade with a country, they're going to live in your country. If you don't trade with a country, they're not. And so by shutting down trade with other countries, Mr. Trump is directly affecting the number of foreigners who enter the United States. When the Second World War ended 80 years ago, the United States established very strong ties and relationships with countries abroad. They were economic, political, geostrategic, and military. Those ties created a global order with the United States at the center, with the United States at the top of the food chain, the most influential country without question. Mr. Trump is weakening so many of those ties that produced democracy abroad, prosperity, and general levels of stability, the likes of which modern history has never seen. And as he does so, through a trade policy, through a unilateral policy in foreign affairs, and through America First, he is intentionally weakening many of those ties. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a very different thing. It is a different world that is evolving as a result of this redirection of America from global engager and defender of principles to a country looking more inward upon itself and using tariffs to reduce trade reliance on other nations. Thank you for attending this lecture, and as always, stay engaged and make great decisions.
Thank you for your support and for your participation.
Well, good evening. I'm Russell Goodman, and I'm one of the board members of the World Affairs Council of Harrisburg, and I must say, what an interesting video presentation we just had. Even though it was produced in 2025, it's clearly dealing with issues that we are contending with every day right now. And to help us walk through some of those things tonight is a good friend of mine and someone who has been with us in similar presentations in past, and that is Dr. Sanjay Paul of Elizabethtown College. Let me just read you a little something about his bio before I turn it over to him, because I know he has an interesting presentation, including, I believe, a PowerPoint for us tonight. First of all, some credentials. He has a bachelor's in technology and civil engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras. He also has a PhD in economics from the State University of New York, Buffalo. Dr. Paul teaches courses in mathematical economics, data visualization, international economics, and a first-year seminar on one of my favorite topics, globalization. He's developed an international organization seminar in which he leads a study tour to Switzerland and Germany that involves collaboration with a university there, Constance University in Germany. He also has led study tours to Brussels, Dhaka, and to the United Nations in New York City. Dr. Paul's research interests, including, as I said, globalization, economic development, and trade policy. That's why he is expert for this topic that we're going to be discussing tonight. Really, really important topic because tariffs, as the video said, are tied in with immigration. So this is something that is top of mind for all of us in the country here today, or should be. Also, I must say that Dr. Paul has written on economic issues for the Patriot News, Penn Live and Patriot News in Harrisburg and throughout central Pennsylvania. Well, if I might refer to you as Sanjay, since we've known each other for quite some time, let me turn it over to Dr. Paul. Sanjay, it is your digital floor. Take it away, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much, Russell, for the very kind introduction. So let me attempt this heroic task of sharing my PowerPoint with the audience here. And perhaps someone can let me know if that actually has worked.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, terrific. Right. So we just saw this video on Trump's tariffs and the world economy. And the things have moved fairly quickly since the video. So there is a few more things that we can look at in addition to what was mentioned earlier. So let me go through a sort of fairly brief presentation, and then we can maybe do the Q&A with Russell handling the Q&A session. So here is a sort of rough outline how it began in 2025, because this is Trade Wars Redux, because we saw the first version a few years ago under the first administration of Trump. So I'll focus now on what has happened since early 2025. We're going to take a look at a particular issue that exercises Mr. Trump quite a lot, which is the fact that we seem to import a great deal from other countries, and that affection is not being reciprocated. So we'll take a look at the data. We are going to look at this question of our tariffs, taxes, and there seems to be some debate about this issue. So we'll take a look at some numbers as well. We'll take a look at a sort of mini rebellion that seems to be brewing as a sort of backlash, as a kind of opposition to some of Trump's tariff policies. And finally, I'll conclude with some thoughts. So how it began? Trump invoked the IEEPA, which gives the president the authority to impose tariffs. That's Mr. Trump's claim. And so he imposed tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China in February last year. I mean, this seems like such a long time ago, but it was only last year that this whole saga sort of started to occur. And the initial rationale for the tariffs being imposed on these countries was, to deal with this influx of illegal aliens and illicit drugs, fentanyl. And that was the initial rationale provided for the tariff policy. Well, we move on quickly to April of 2025, when Trump used this idea of a national emergency, again invoking the same law that he had invoked earlier to impose the tariffs in February. But this time, he has now imposed tariffs on a whole range of trading partners of the United States. And so if you take a look at some of the numbers that he released on what he called called Liberation Day, this is a sort of partial list of countries. They range from very small countries to large trading partners. They include countries which have very little trade really with the United States, and countries that have a lot of trade with the United States. So he was he took aim at a large group of countries around the world. And so just to give an idea here, so you have China, which got hit with a 34% tariff. Down below, further below, you see the European Union, which got off relatively lightly with 20%. And there was some kind of rationale provided for how these numbers were determined, but a closer scrutiny of these numbers revealed that there were some significant problems with the methodology used to derive these kinds of numbers. All right, so let's take a look at some data about US imports. So if you look at how much the United States imports, and this is looking at just goods, what we refer to as the merchandise trade. So in 2024, this is the column on the right shows us the figures for calendar year 2024 in millions of dollars. We had a total import bill of about $3.3 trillion. And some of the biggest items that we import are, in fact, the largest one is pharmaceutical preparations, almost $250 billion worth in 1 year. We also spend a lot on imported passenger cars, more than $200 billion. Crude oil, 167. Slightly lower down, you see computers. We also spend a great deal on imported computers, cell phones, smartphones, computer accessories, and then finally semiconductors. So this gives us an idea of the kind of goods that really make up the basket of stuff that we buy from around the world, the major items. So who do we buy them from? Who are our major trading partners? Well, if you look at the data for this year, and now here, the first column is the rank, and followed by country, followed by imports in billions of dollars. This is year to date till November of 2025. And then finally, what percent of total imports that amounts to. So Mexico has actually now become our largest source of imports. They were always in the sort of top three trading partners for a long time, along with Canada and China. But Mexico has now vaulted to the top. Canada is our number 2 source of imports. about $350 billion. And China has fallen to number three with $287 billion. Remember, this is the data as of November 2025. So this is after the tariffs were imposed over the previous few months. Taiwan has become a significant source of inputs as well, and there is Vietnam bringing up the rear at number 5. So these are the largest sources of imports for the United States. Let me turn to the question of, are tariffs similar to taxes? Because we seem to, dislike taxes. No one likes to pay taxes, or I should say, very few people do. And do tariffs fall in the same category as taxes? Well, the answer is yes. A tariff is a tax on an imported good. And there have now been estimates of the magnitude of the effect of Trump's tariffs on households in the United States, on the government's revenue, on our gross domestic product, the size of the US economy, and so on. So this is one such estimate from the Tax Foundation, which is considered to be fairly nonpartisan. And according to them, and this is not very different from the estimates you see, for example, from the Yale Budget Lab and other sort of credible sources. So the first number that we see in the first column here is the average tax increase per US household in 2026. So this is the estimate of how much the average tax increase is per household. And that's about $1,300. So on average, a household in the US will pay an extra $1,300 because of the tariffs imposed by Trump. The second column looks at a number that Trump is particularly fond of, which is, what does it do to the government's revenues? And sure enough, there is an increase in the government's revenue. The figure here that you see is about $2 trillion over a 10-year period. So let's say roughly about $200 billion per year. So this is the estimate that tariffs will generate about $200 billion worth of revenue, additional revenue per year for the US government. The number next to it, gross domestic product, the size of the economy, is expected to take a hit actually, because like an increase in taxes, an increase in tariffs is considered to be a contractionary policy. In other words, it leads to lower GDP, lower economic growth, and according to their estimates, it's going to take a hit of 0.5% of our growth rate. The next number is capital stock, which is our machinery and buildings and factories and so on. So that capital stock is also likely to fall. And finally, the last column takes a look at employment, equivalent full-time jobs, and that is also likely to fall. So you have all these negative consequences of Trump's tariffs, and these kinds of numbers are not very different from each other when you look at various studies from credible sources. What do the people think about all this stuff? So here is one poll from The Economist and YouGov. So this is a fairly reliable polling outfit. And so the question they asked was, do you think tariffs imposed by Trump have decreased or increased the prices that you have paid for things? And so what do most Americans say? Well, about 69%, almost 70% of Americans believe that Trump's tariffs have led to higher prices. That's a fairly high number of people who believe this to be the case. And it turns out that their belief is substantiated by data from studies that have looked very carefully at how tariff rates have seeped into the prices of goods that we end up buying in the market. And so there is now a growing body of literature that supports the argument that Trump's tariffs have actually led to higher prices. And this is what the people also say in the poll. And if you look at the sort of party line thinking here, they all, even the Republicans agree that Trump's tariffs have increased prices. The next poll, what do the people think? Do you think the Supreme Court should strike down Trump's tariffs or not? And here, if you look at the overall response, US adult citizens, it's really right down the middle. 50% of them say the Supreme Court should strike down Trump's tariffs. And the partisan divide is very clear here. Democrats, 87% think the Supreme Court should strike them down. Independents, only about half, and Republicans, very few. So here you have a very stark partisan divide, unlike the previous question where the question was, do you think that tariffs have raised prices, where the agreement was unanimous. So this is a question to be pondered over. Why are people saying one thing, that prices have gone up because of tariffs, yet on the other hand, a significant number are reluctant to see the Supreme Court actually strike down the tariffs, which have led to the higher prices that they are confronting when they go to buy goods at the supermarket and so on. Might be a good question for lunch with a political science colleague and see what's going on there. So a little rebellion. So what are the first signs of a rebellion against Trump's tariff policies? Well, a few days ago, 6 Republicans voted to terminate emergency tariffs on Canada. And until now, Trump had faced no opposition from his side, from his party. They had all gone along with whatever policies essentially he was implementing. But for the first time, you see a kind of backlash, a very tiny backlash, very symbolic at the moment, because this ultimately will not change anything. But you're starting to see the perhaps the first signs of discontent being expressed by Republicans. On the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEEPA, that Trump has used to impose a lot of the tariffs, we are still waiting for the ruling from the Supreme Court. They have now been deciding on this case for weeks, months, and it's possible that we may get this result next month, or perhaps it might even go till June or so. So some final thoughts. So Trump is using tariffs for a variety of objectives. For instance, his first sort of bête noire, the first thing that he detested, which was quite clear in his first term as well, was that the United States is running a trade deficit, particularly a merchandise trade deficit, a goods trade deficit. And so he has been fairly consistent in voicing his opinion that this is a sign that the United States is being taken advantage of by other countries. And he has repeatedly made this argument, even internationally. The U.S. has been the sort of victim of all these, sophisticated trading partners who have somehow managed to get Americans to buy more of their stuff than what they buy from Americans. So that's objective number one, to reduce the trade deficit. The second objective that he has also cited is to increase the extent of manufacturing in the US economy. So he wants more factories to come back to the United States. He wants multinational corporations, both American and foreign, to set up shop, to set up factories in the United States. In other words, he wants to return to some earlier era of manufacturing when it was a fairly significant component of GDP. Unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe this is not an unfortunate thing, but it's just a fact of life, that as economies develop, the extent of manufacturing in their output of goods and services, manufacturing as a percent of GDP, tends to decline. This is true for the United States. It's been going on not just for years or decades, it's been going on for many decades. And this is true in Europe. It's even true in China, where manufacturing as a percent of GDP has fallen in recent years. The third objective that Trump has cited, with increasing vigor, I might add now, is to raise revenue. Now that he's starting to see tariff revenues flowing into the coffers of the Treasury, I think he's starting to make it very clear that this is a very salutary achievement. And now, if suddenly the Supreme Court were to say, we are going to strike down these tariffs, well, all these revenues are going to disappear, and the Supreme Court is going to be responsible for that state of affairs. So raising revenue has now become a fairly important issue with tariffs. There are other objectives that Trump has pursued. The fentanyl crisis, the illegal aliens, as he calls them, acquiring Greenland. So he is using tariffs as a cudgel to achieve a whole variety of objectives. And it's not clear that one instrument, tariffs, can deliver on so many fronts. The other thing that has occurred, which was also referred to in the video, there has been a weakening of international organizations, and specifically dealing with trade, it is the World Trade Organization, which sets the global rules for international trade. And the United States was instrumental in setting up this organization shortly after World War II, when it was called GATT. It became the World Trade Organization in the 1990s. But the objective of the organization is largely the same, which is to promote free trade, to bring down trade barriers, to reduce tariffs, to reduce subsidies, to allow the free market, really, to determine the outcomes of trade. But Trump has weakened the WTO, perhaps fatally, we do not know. Already the dispute resolution mechanism, which looks at issues that countries can bring to Geneva, where the headquarters of WTO are. If they have disputes, trade disputes, they come to Geneva, and there are mechanisms in place to deal with disputes. But the United States has not approved the hiring of certain judges when their terms expired. So that element, which is a very crucial element of having a rules-based trading regime, that element has been dismantled. And with the sort of unilateral imposition of tariffs by Trump, the demands that he's making on trading partners about what they must do, Uh, all these fly in the face of any kind of international cooperation that has been the hallmark uh, uh, for the large part since World War II. And so the future of trade agreements is also now in doubt, especially trade agreements involving the United States. There are questions about how trustworthy are these trade agreements. If you can sign off on an agreement today and tomorrow you get a new demand from the United States, well, that is going to uh, uh, discourage countries from signing trade agreements or adhering to them. And so I think some of the actions of the administration with regard to a kind of whimsical nature with which tariffs have been raised, paused, lowered, and then raised again for entirely different reasons. All these actions have created an aura of mistrust about the credibility, about the commitment of the US government when it signs an agreement. Maybe we can talk about some of these in the Q&A session with the trade agreements with India and how different countries are sort of starting to coalesce and form agreements of their own to sort of insulate themselves from the actions of the United States. So perhaps we can get into that during the Q&A. So Russell, I think I'm going to stop at this point and turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for that drill down. That was terrific information. Let me just say this, that you, unlike our presenter from the Foreign Policy Association, are entirely correct. The United States Supreme Court has not ruled on the International Economic Emergency Powers Act at this point. They seem to be waiting to see if Congress is going to do anything, but it seems to be clear that despite this little rebellion that you mentioned, that's not going to happen. And even if it were in the Senate, they don't seem to have a veto-proof majority at this point. So you're entirely correct that at this point, the president seems to be talking about the amount of money that tariffs are bringing into the country. But 2 points. The tariffs, the duties, the taxes, and the fees that are generated by the tariffs are largely being paid by American businesses. And we need to keep that in mind. So, yeah, the money's rolling in, but it's rolling in from us in a sense. The other thing is that the prices that are going up have not gone up quite as much as expected, but that's because companies, retailers, and manufacturers are, in a sense, eating the increases, eating the costs. Well, how much longer can that go on? What do you say?
Yeah, those are two excellent points, Russell. The first one about the law that Trump has invoked, which is with the Supreme Court. We do not know how they are going to rule on it, and will the Congress remain supine and accede to almost any policy that Trump proposes? That's still a very open question. You're absolutely right. So this little rebellion may turn out to be, not very long-lived rebellion to start with. The second point that you raise about the revenues. So you're absolutely correct about this. So the tariffs imposed are like a tax, and therefore the tax is going to be paid. It has to be paid by somebody. And Trump's argument is that this tax will be paid for by foreign firms who want to sell into the United States. In other words, if let's say a tax of $100 is imposed on some product, the foreign firm will reduce their price by $100 and pay the $100 tax to the US government so that there is no net change for the US consumer. Well, that is not very likely to happen. And in fact, we are now starting to see studies that look at this issue, and the studies are starting to show that prices of goods bought by Americans have risen as a result of the tariffs. So ultimately, the U.S. consumer is going to end up paying a lot of these tariffs. And there is also a kind of distributional aspect about these about the effect of these tariffs on which kind of households in America are likely to be hit hardest by the tariffs. And so there are studies that show, for example, that it's the cheaper goods, particularly from China, that have been hit hardest, meaning their prices have risen the most. And the income group that is likely to consume these goods, the cheaper goods, the lower priced goods, are generally the lower income households. And it is they, therefore, who are going to bear the brunt of the price increases which come as a result of the tariffs. So if you are affluent, if you are in the upper income category, you're not probably going to see a huge increase in prices of the stuff that you buy. But it's the lower income folks who are going to see proportionately a larger hit, to their wallet.
Sanjay, questions are rolling in from some of the viewers. I want to get to some of them. I think they're really quite interesting.
Okay.
How would you respond to those who argue that despite these tariffs, the overall inflation rate has not increased much in recent months, and the stock market itself is doing well? What do you say?
Yeah, the stock market, I don't want to speculate on the stock market because it's the most dangerous thing to do, really. But the stock market could be going up for various reasons, including AI and all that kind of stuff. So there might be other reasons for it. But let me focus on the inflation part. And there's one study that has come out that looked at exactly this question about what might have been the effect on inflation as a result of Trump's tariffs in 2025. And so the finding was that I think it was August. If you look at the August inflation figure, it was 2.9% annualized. But without the tariffs, they estimate, again, this is from the National Bureau of Economic Research, a very credible outfit. And according to this group of researchers, the inflation rate would have been 2.2%, not 2.9. Now, here is the ironic part about this. So first of all, the inflation rate would have been lower if the tariffs were not imposed in the first place. But the ironic part about this is that 2.2% inflation is very close to 2% inflation, which is the target for the Federal Reserve. And so if the inflation rate had been 2.2%, very close to 2%, Mr. Powell, the chairman of the Fed, and maybe the other officials at the Fed, would have been more likely to cut interest rates, which is what Trump has been demanding of Mr. Powell, and threatened to investigate him and all the rest of it, because he thinks Mr. Powell is not sufficiently inclined to cut interest rates the way he wants it. But ironically, his very tariffs might have kept inflation high enough to prevent Powell from cutting interest rates.
Interesting. Another question. Despite these tariffs, the GDP has not fallen. Not only that, it has increased to around 3+% or so. So how do you respond to that situation? What's going on there?
So there are a couple of things going on. First, the imports which are directly affected by tariffs are still a relatively small proportion of the size of the economy. So even though we are the largest importer in the world, we also have the largest GDP in the world of more than $30 trillion. So imports as a ratio of our overall size of the economy is still a fairly, not negligible by any means, but still a fairly small number. And so that's one aspect. Even with the tariffs that have been imposed, because they directly affect imports to start with, imports are not a large part of our GDP. Therefore, GDP growth is not immediately terribly affected by the tariffs. But the other thing is that with the tariffs, especially because of the uncertainty around the level of the tariffs, is it going to be 10% today? Is it going to be 20% tomorrow? The duration of the tariff, is it going to be there for the next 1 week, or will it be paused tomorrow? Who knows? All these are highly uncertain things. And in this sort of uncertain environment, the effect of the tariff, firms may be unwilling to pass on the tariff fully to consumers in the United States. And therefore, on the whole, with inflation also not increasing substantially, the real GDP growth adjusted for inflation, still remains fairly decent. Actually, we are growing at more than 4% per year, in the neighborhood of 4.3, 4.4% GDP growth in the last quarter, which is pretty strong. We had a pretty bad first quarter immediately after which includes, by the way, the month of February when the tariffs were first announced. The first quarter would be Jan, Feb, March. We actually had negative growth. But since then, our growth has picked up steam. And so for the moment, GDP growth remains fairly strong.
Sanjay, this may be the one of the last questions, but this harks back to, let me see if I have this. Yeah, this harks back to what you were addressing about Mr. Trump boasting that the money that he is bringing into the country. Certain countries like Japan have said, if you keep the tariffs low, we will invest in manufacturing $500 billion or some such figure as that. That very largely has not taken place at this point. And as the presenter from the Foreign Policy Association said, by the end of 2026, we're going to be in the run-up to the next presidential election. And is it your view that perhaps some of these countries that have said, oh, yes, we're going to invest big money, are really going to try to wait this thing out?
I think that's very likely.
More of a political question than an economic question, but I think it's fair to say because the whole thing came about because of the tariffs being used as a weapon.
Yeah, no, that's a good observation, Russell. I think countries might be taking a wait and see attitude for as long as they can. And the other thing is, these countries are making promises which they may, carry out, but maybe not immediately. It's not very clear, what the enforcement mechanisms are. And in fact, a lot of these agreements that Trump touts as agreements are not really agreements. If you look at the terminology they use for the papers that they put out on the White House website, etc., they are frameworks. Many of them are frameworks. And what does a framework mean? Well, maybe it will lead eventually to an agreement. And then there are terms that are, clearly laid out. You must do this by this time. And if you don't do it, this is what will happen. But all that is missing. If you put out a 1 or 2 page framework after you talk to the European Union or to India or any country for that matter, how seriously are you going to take the terms of that framework? You're going to wait and see if those, whatever was discussed, and even there are disagreements about what exactly was discussed in the framework. The US will put out a statement saying this country decided to do all this ABC, and the other country will have nothing to say about ABC. They are saying
So these
DEF.
frameworks really have no teeth, is what you're saying. Sanjay, I think this may be our last question, but the viewer says that the video suggested that past tariffs have led to economic stagnation, maybe even to a depression. Are we seeing any signs of that? And if not, why not?
So the if not, why not? I don't think we are really seeing signs of countries starting to erect trade barriers against each other. And the if not, why not is I think countries have learned their lessons from the past. So we have learned the lessons of Smoot-Hawley tariffs from the 1930s. Even though the Smoot-Hawley tariffs did not cause the depression, they seem to have exacerbated it. They seem to have made it more severe, more long-lived. And since World War II, the experience of, let's say, the tigers, the so-called Asian tigers, which have grown very rapidly, on the backs of what? On the backs of international trade. And so that has been yet another lesson that countries have learned, that opening up your countries to competition, your firms to foreign competition, to engaging in international trade, to exporting your stuff to other countries, this is very important for economic growth and development. And so what you see is, if the United States is going to erect trade barriers to this sort of unprecedented degree, the other countries are starting to make arrangements of their own. So, for example, the India-European Union deal, which has been called the mother of all deals. It's a somewhat unfortunate expression, but the mother of all deals was, again, not fully signed. It's sort of like a framework, but that's the kind of thing you're starting to see, that the EU is signing deals with Mercosur, which is Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay in South America. EU is signing trade deals with India. The UK is signing trade deals with India. So you are seeing all these trade deals being signed, not the United States.
Well, we've seen the United States opting out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which of course allowed China to become, a very a big influence in that situation. So we have departed from a number of such organizations. I said that was going to be the last question. This is going to be it, because somebody just got in, threw something in the basket. Very interesting. If retaliatory tariffs from other countries continue, could we begin to see a trend of worldwide deglobalization? Well, that should be right up your alley. What do you say?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. If the United States keeps its tariffs. Now, I must point out that the rhetoric even of the Trump administration, when it comes to tariffs, does not quite match their actions. In other words, all those Liberation Day tariffs that were put out with great fanfare on the White House lawn back on April 2nd, they've almost all have been whittled down, in some cases quite significantly. So China at one time was being threatened with a 125% tariff, and now it's down to 10. So even the Trump administration's rhetoric has been not quite in sync with what you actually see with the imposition of actual tariffs. I mean, they're still pretty high. 10% is still a very bad number for a tariff rate, much higher than the 3% or so that the world had become used to. And then you have 25% in some cases. And if other countries retaliate with similar tariffs of their own, which is very likely, then you end up with a beggar thy neighbor policy, which is what we saw back during the Great Depression.
Well, that would be unfortunate indeed. Listen, I want to thank you so very much, Sanjay, for this drill down because it's been interesting, informative, and valuable. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. And now let me turn it back over to our president, to Joyce Davis.
Thank you, Russell.
Well, thank you. That was most informative and most interesting. But I have to tell you, in listening to you guys, I thought one of the main things the world likes and business likes is stability and predictability.
Yeah.
And that's out of the window.
Yeah.
Even as you talked about, he says one thing, but other things actually happen. How can you plan? If I had a business, how could I really know how to plan 2 to 3 years out? So I get it that we're all in a state of wait and see, but it seems to me that's going to can't help but have some drastic repercussions for us. But again, we could talk about this all night. Thank you again, Dr. Paul, for joining us. I saw Dr. Varamini, who's another expert. We have to get him on this sometime, also joined us. And of
Absolutely.
course, Russell did a fantastic job.
He did.
But let me say this, everyone. This is, again, the second of what we hope will be 8 discussions. And our next discussion is a doozy. We're going to talk about Ukraine and the war in Ukraine and what its impact on Europe has been. And for that, we actually have a woman I met in Prague at the most recent Forum 2000, Anna Huskova, who's an analyst, and she is now a fellow with the EAP Civil Society. But more than that, she is actually a designer, urban designer and architect, and she is Ukrainian. So there you go. Thank you, Mary. So she will be coming in to really talk about what it's like on the ground, what they've been dealing with. And as someone who has to look not only at what's going on now and all the destruction, but how do you pull things back together again once we hope this is all over. So thank you, everyone, for joining us again. Kudos, Dr. Paul. You didn't let us down. You really helped us out. We'll be inviting you back for sure. So
okay.
See you the next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Joyce.
No
thanks very much for having me over, and thanks to Russell as well, and to Mary. Thank you all.
And our next one will be February 26th, next week at 6 p.m. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you again.